Before you had any notion of becoming a writer, you were always a dedicated reader.
Yeah.
And we went on a little pilgrimage today to a writer that you read when you were 12. And this is a writer who was born in Cork City, and whom very few Cork people know about. Do you want to just say a few words about that particular writer?
You know, I don't know if people in Cork, I talked to Pat knows this writer. His name is Ethel Lillian Vonage, whose father was a mathematician, Cork-born mathematician, and his name is Boole?
He's George Boole.
George Boole, and her mother was a feminist writer, very early feminist writer, and her uncle was, I don't know his first name, but her uncle, her mother's brother, was Everest. Mount Everest was named after her uncle. So it's a very interesting family. It's very interesting. And I'll tell the other part of the story, how I got to know her. There was this novel she wrote and published in 1897, I think, called The Gadfly. And it was about a young revolutionary in Italy in this civil revolution period. And I can, I swear I still remember her picture on our, the second page of our Chinese version of The Gadfly. And I read it when I was 12, and I was just blown away by the writing. It was so beautiful and romantic, and it was very fresh reading her book compared to reading all these Chinese revolutionary novels where, romantic love was forbidden. So I was very interested in her, and only very recently I discovered that she was born in Cork.
Yeah. Well, people in Cork need to have a more detailed discussion on themselves and avoid it, but probably just touch on it, because it kind of leads into the fact that when you did decide to become a writer, it was another Cork writer who gave you that grand notion.
Right. Yes, I feel very, I feel this affinity with Cork because of, Ethel Vonage, and more importantly, because of William Trevor. I think I started reading him around 2000. I read one story in the New Yorker called A Friend in the Trade, and it was a beautiful story. But I didn't even notice his name when I was reading that story. And one winter, I think it was a couple of years later, a friend of mine, whose grandfather actually was Irish, and her grandfather gave the collection of William Trevor, the collected stories of William Trevor, to her as a present. And so she was going away for the winter break. She said, why don't you read this book? I think you would like it. And I never returned the book. No, she actually said, when she came back, I said, I just fell in love with this writer. I read him every day this winter. And she said, why don't you keep it? And I think just from then on, I started to know what I wanted to do as a story writer. I want to write like William Trevor. I want to tell stories. And it's also very interesting. I was just thinking recently, I've been reading him constantly for the past 5-6 years. And in a way, it's very interesting. I think it sounds horrible, but it's actually my true feeling. I feel that the stories I write and the stories I'm going to write, they have all been written by him, which is not a bad thing, which is a very comforting thing for me. And so I think that's how I feel influenced by him. Yeah.
And since you won the O'Connor Award, you've not only got to know William Trevor through his writing, but you've got to know him in person. And what's your impression of the man as a person?
It's very interesting. Pat and I earlier on talked about, sometimes you love a writer's work, but you hate the writer. And sometimes you love the writer, but you don't like the work. I guess the impression I got from his stories and books, I guess the impression was confirmed when I met him, and he's truly very gentle and sympathetic human being.
That's great. And before I go back to getting you to talk a little bit about your own writing experience. I noticed in a recent interview that all your most recent reading is to do with Irish writing. You're reading Molly Keane and John Banville and John McGarren. So what's all that about? I mean, there's so much literature out there in the world, and what is it about Irish writing that attracts you so much?
I wish I could explain. I don't know how to explain, but I do feel. One thing I noticed, this was last time when I came to Ireland in August. The first thing I noticed about when I talked to Irish people was that history is very much on everybody's mind. And someone, randomly I met in the street, I would ask a question, the person would start to quote history in 1200 years, or 1200 or 1300. History is very present, I feel, in Ireland. And people would talk about the famine as if it were yesterday. I just love it because, I don't know, I feel that Americans really do have a bad sense of history because, history is pretty much not talked about. I feel it's very present in Chinese culture too, that history actually is very present in everyday life. I think that's one thing, that there are probably a lot of things that I cannot explain well, but I do feel, it's very funny. I've been reading, all Irish writers in the past year, and I do feel this affinity to maybe the landscape these writers write about, or people.